Okay. So what we're going to be talking about is we're going to talk about 4 essential things, and these are common threads within all of the spiritual traditions, but it's to understand essentially what we mean by the inner teaching of all of these religions. So what Swami Dayananda did was he basically unfolded the inner teaching of Hinduism, for example. And when we're talking about the inner teaching, we're talking about the transformation of ourselves as individuals, a spiritual transformation. So the first element is this, is that we're in a situation where we are separate and alienated and cut off from God. Now, this isn't a moral condemnation. It's basically an existential revelation. It basically shows us our actual condition. So what happens is, so what happens is that we have a situation where we are experiencing ourselves and appreciating ourselves as a psychophysical entity, so that we take ourselves to be a thinking, feeling, sensing being, and we're identified with this. Now, it doesn't matter whether we become functionally brilliant in the world of function. You know, we can make money, learn skills, do all of that, which is all good in terms of function. But there's no spiritual illumination in this condition. And also we're told that this condition, even though it can appear very nice, at our very core, we suffer from what Swami Dayananda calls self-dissatisfaction. Or what the Christians would say, we're like a withering vine. And because of that, everybody you know, irrespective of the face they present, which is always a face of innocence, the real story is this self-dissatisfaction. And what happens is when the world or other people don't do what we like, we suddenly find ourselves disturbed. Is that true? And when we find ourselves disturbed, we're in this delusion that we're being disturbed by something out there. But in actual fact, the real meaning of the disturbance is that this condition of our heart, of what we are being, is revealed. And it's fairly black. And we don't like to get near this pain or suffering. That's why, and we can see this. How many people here have sometimes, when you've got into an argument with your spouse and you want to change them in order to feel good again? Who's ever experienced that? That's because we think that the suffering is, the cause of the suffering is something external to us, which is normal and natural. We were talking about subjectivity last week. And so what happens is, so long as we can maintain control of other people and events to some degree, we say we're happy. Okay, we got the solution. If I can control Sylvia, yes, life is good. Okay, I can't, by the way, I've tried, it doesn't work. But so we have this condition of darkness, and what I mean by that is our hearts are darkened by a tremendous pain and suffering, and our minds are full of falsity, in the sense that we can have all sorts of notions about ourselves that protect us from experiencing the self-dissatisfaction. I'm a good guy, I'm all right, you know, life is going good. We have all of the mechanisms that Dr. Freud pointed out. We've got repression, where we kind of, even though we don't consciously know it, we think we're not going to die, which allays the anxiety. So we have this structure of justification and adaptation to this fundamental problem. But our whole life is a defense against getting near this self-dissatisfaction. And because we're afraid of the self-dissatisfaction. If we can see this because, when we're in an argument and we're upset with someone and we're trying to change them, what's driving that is fear. We can't stand being what we're like. We think other people have caused what we're being like, and if we change them, it can fix up. So we're in what we call darkness. Early Christians called it the thinking of natural man. You know what I mean? So when we look at ourselves and we look at other people and we look at the world, we've got all of these notions and thoughts about, conceptions about what the world is. We have reality conceptions, don't we? We've got conceptions about what my reality is, whether we know it or not. I'm a psychophysical being. I'm an entity, and my life and being is the functioning of thinking, feelings, and physical sensations and actions. I take this to be my life. And so this is a tremendous darkness. But it's not seen, because unless you actually have a comparison, you can't see it actually. Unless it's juxtaposed with something else within it, and it doesn't seem dark. It seemed, and particularly when things are going our way, it seems okay. It feels pretty good. But it's a tremendous darkness, and because it's being alienated from reality. It doesn't feel that way. I live in reality. That's one of our assumptions. I live in reality. I'm seeing what's true. The fact of the matter is, you can functionally see what's true. That way we can learn how to build bridges, make businesses, and all of that stuff. That's functional knowledge. But this isn't gnosis. This is not awakening to a different kind of life or to the spiritual life. Are we clear on that? No matter how good I get, function, how clever I am. And I'm not knocking functional skills. They're very important. So that's the existential condition. That's element number one. Okay, number one. Element number two is that we have what can come alive in us is an understanding of what God is. And God is real life. So the life and light that is God is real life. What's important is that we need to awaken to this life, light, and fullness that is God. This does not take away our thinking, feelings, and sensations, but it's wider. It includes more. And so the thing is that what connects us to this reality, so that this reality is referred to in many ways. It can be called God, it can be called life, light, and fullness. That's how the Hindus talk about God, Satchitananda. The Buddhists talk about wisdom, compassion. Even Swami Dayananda used the term for God, wisdom, compassion. So there is this reality that is life itself. We have a mistaken understanding of ourselves because we take the appearance of life as the fact. And we know with Plato, he made us the first to make the distinction between appearance and reality. Appearance and reality. He says we're caught in the world of appearances, didn't he? We're caught in the world of appearances, and we take this world of appearances to be life itself. But that's only an apparency. Our life and being is not thinking, feelings, sensations, and actions. It feels that way, it seems that way, but it's not. And then in contrast to this physical life, we have this life, light, and fullness that we call God. We all tracking so far? And now, what is it that joins us? Here we are in this existential condition of darkness. Do you all see that? It's universally denied or even not even known about. I mean, it's universal. So we have this existential condition of being alienated, separate and cut off from the life, light, and fullness that is God. Are we clear on that? Now, What is it that brings me as an individual who's alienated, who's like a withering vine cut off from life, so intrinsically miserable? What is it that brings me into relationship with the life, light, and fullness that is God? Now we come to the most interesting thing, which Swami Dayananda unfolded extremely clearly, is that it's wisdom. It's the awakening of a new way of seeing. As we've talked about 2 weeks ago, or the 2 sessions ago, it's the awakening of a vision that comes vertically. You see, when we think, it's always based on the past, isn't it? So my normal thinking about myself, other people in the world, is I've got this background of information and knowledge. I look at the present event, I associate the present event with the past event, and then I so-called see. No, I don't see. I have an evaluation of what reality is in front of me, and that gets projected as experience. This is very good when you need to go home, isn't it? Right? But when I think that the reality is my thinking about, is my thoughts, this is what Swami Dayananda called subjectivity. I become the thinking becomes me. I look at myself and I go, look, I'm a fantastic guy. I'm pretty magnificent. And if I think thoughts like that, how am I going to feel? Very, very elated. If I think thoughts about myself, I'm no good, I'm just a scumbag, I'm going to feel very, very deflated. Both of them are delusional. They are like a dream. They're a projected experience. And you see how it's related to the past? It's a movement of time, that evaluation, isn't it? The past is determining how I see the present. So there's no seeing, actually, even though it seems to be seeing. But when we're talking about gnosis, or awakening to the truth, or whatever you want to call enlightenment, they use all of these terms. You've heard all these terms. What we're talking about is we're talking about awakening to what really is. So we have this contrast that Plato pointed out. What is, what seems to be, and what really is. But what really is that when we awaken to what really is, wisdom obtains as a new way of seeing. And it comes from above. It's not horizontal knowledge. Okay, it's vertical. And the vertical is always ever present right here. Okay, it's not time bound. Okay, so when Swami Dayananda said that what scriptures are used for is that they are an instrument that opens our eyes to what is. They're an instrument that opens our eyes to what is. They're a means of knowledge, right? He doesn't mean functional knowledge, okay? He means that, can you see that if I am to be able to look at my life in the right way, look at myself, look at other people, look at the world, if I'm looking at my own projections of people, myself, and the world, do you see how I'm enclosed in darkness? So, for example, and if you think that you're never enclosed in darkness, how many people here have sometimes thought that their wife or their husband are causing their problems and are the source of their pain? Who's ever thought that? Okay, delusion. It doesn't seem that way, though, does it? It seems as if the external condition is causing it. So when we meet someone like Swami Dayananda, what he does, his teaching does, is that it's a method. It's a method to open our eyes to what really is as opposed to what seems to be. The difference is that when wisdom obtains in us, what happens is, as we see, we be. Now we know that. Like if I'm thinking that you're a real so-and-so, John, okay? If I'm thinking that you're an SOB or something like that, that's a way of seeing, but notice how that way of seeing is a way of being. So the way I'm embodying that way of seeing. So I think that you're an SOB, my tone might be arrogance. It might, I will express that way of seeing as a way of being. Can't help it. And that's what normally happens. So when I have I'm a good guy, suddenly I feel good, right? Of course, because I can't help but be the way I see. I'm a no good, horrible person. Same thing. The difference is, and this is how we know, the difference is with knowledge is it releases. In other words, it's an entirely different new way of seeing that opens up. So for example, you're listening to Swami Dayananda, and right here, right now, as you are, you remember what you recall, that, wait a minute, the problem is centered on me. That's a spiritual understanding. You won't come across this understanding from the past. This is a result of a spiritual understanding because it was unfolded by a teacher. And when I'm actually seeing the way that Swami Dayananda sees, in the sense that I am the locus of the problem. I am always the locus. What I am being is the locus of the problem. When I'm seeing that as a fact, I am freed from blame. Do you see that? Do you see the change in being? I may still be upset that I'm at the starting point of where transformation exists, isn't it? With me. Because how can I I'm free of blame.
Blaming others, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
If I'm blaming, which I'd never do that. So the fact of the matter is that when I am blaming, I am seeing falsely. Can you all see that? Okay, I think that Sylvia is the source of the problem. Swami Dayananda says, no, what's happening is the fundamental problem, the fundamental universal problem that's centered on us is basically being revealed. It was there before, but I had all my defenses up, and then Sylvia says something or does something I don't like. Who's ever experienced that? Someone doing something or saying something you don't like, and then suddenly you're just pulled into this agony. Who's experienced that? Yeah. So wisdom or gnosis is always about a revelation of the good of God. The good of God. Now, the good of God, it's very important to understand the good of God. You know how Swami Dayananda talks about the value of the value? When the value of the value becomes valuable to me. When I see the value of God in my life, okay, what happens is I then have a will towards God, don't I? You can't help but will towards the good. Okay? So God's goodness manifests, first of all, as a set of eyes that frees us from the darkness. Does that make sense? This is the practical thing. When you suddenly see that you're being a jerk, who's ever suddenly midstream, you see you're being harsh, you're feeling right, you're caught up in it, and then suddenly you see that you're being like that. Who's ever had that experience? Notice how it governs you. It's like the winds are taken out of your sail. It is the illuminating light of wisdom that's very kind because it wants to draw you to itself. You're being drawn into the wisdom of God, and that wisdom obtains non-dualistically as your way of seeing, and it guides you, doesn't it? It tells you to knock it off, that what you're doing is unkind. And you see, so it's very, very important to understand the good of God, because it's good and it's valuable because it releases you from this darkness. So that when you're looking at another human being with unkind eyes, who here has sometimes looked at another human being with unkind eyes? Okay? When you're looking like that, you're not seeing reality. You can only see reality in the context of love. Okay, so in the context of the good of kindness, Okay, so let's say I have a spiritual understanding that kindness is good. Okay, because Swami Dayananda covered our whole life, and our whole life includes our life in this world. And so we need to be able to look at this world through spiritual eyes. We need to be able to look at ourselves through our spiritual eyes. We need to look at other people through spiritual eyes, and we need to look at the world through spiritual eyes. Because if we're not looking at ourselves, others, in the world through the eyes of wisdom, which is a gift from God, we stuff it up. Who's noticed that? Do you see what I mean? That's just the rule. So, and then, but what's really important in terms of resolving this self-dissatisfaction. Self-dissatisfaction is the term Swami Dayananda gives, the one problem he gives for all of the different psychological problems that human beings suffer from. Because all of them have this one characteristic: I hate being what I'm like. So this one problem is manifest in diverse ways. When we're afraid of death, when we're upset about the fact we're getting old, when we are fighting or angry, or when we're empty or lonely, or it doesn't matter. They all have this one common denominator, don't they? What happens is the common denominator is I hate being what I am like. Now, if you're a vine cut off from the very life, light, and fullness that is God, which is the vine, and you're a branch and you're cut off from the life of the vine, you can't help but be miserable. Does that make sense? You can't help but be miserable. So what Swami Dayananda's teaching does is that it is a that what happens is the way, as soon as, because of that principle, the way I see is the way I be. This is why Vedanta works, so that when a spiritual way of seeing opens up in us, it's exactly the same as a new life opening us in us. It's a new life. Okay? Meister Eckhart said it's the reality of God being born in the soul. It's a new life. It's not a modification of the past life. You see, this past life is a life full of me. Me, myself, I, and Bede. Do you see what I mean? And this life we dramatize continually. And we love it, by the way. There's some part of us that just loves being me. Okay? But what is continually on offer is a new life. And this new life comes from God, and this new life is God. It's God's life. And this is this non-dualistic knowledge, because this is the fourth element. So you have the darkness, you have the wisdom, which opens our eyes to the good of God. The good of God in the form of, first of all, in current living, like, for example, when we have the impulse of kindness alive and active in us, that is a spiritual quality that comes from above. And when that is active in us, we're moved by it. Who's noticed that? We're moved by it. When the spiritual quality of patience comes alive in us, we change. We're patient. When we're being patient, we act patiently. When we be in kindness, we act kindly. When we're being peaceful, we have a peaceful manner. You're with me here? This is the only thing that changes us. There's nothing else that changes us. When we're seeing truthfully, when we're seeing what is, as opposed to what seems to be, and we're released from our antagonisms and all of this sort of stuff. So the darkness, the reality of God, the wisdom that opens ourselves to the reality of God, and then the last thing, which is the most important. This is the culmination. Dayananda says we need the wisdom, and then we need to live the wisdom. Our spiritual task is to live the wisdom, to live the life that God is giving me as my very life. Then it's non-dualistic, isn't it? All right? The false idea that I can have self-awareness and self-consciousness and all of this stuff without a life of virtue is ridiculous. If I'm not being loving and caring, because our understanding of God is loving and caring itself in the absolute form. If I'm not being loving and caring, am I joined with God? Am I participating in the life of God? If I'm being hateful and resentful, but I'm being aware and I've got spiritual illumination, it's ridiculous. So what all this depends upon is the revelation of what God is and how we can open ourselves to that is. Are we clear? Now we're given an understanding from the Shin tradition, which is that God is ever active, constantly drawing us into itself. So there's never the blight of Christian theology is their idea of a wrathful God, a God that will punish. Now, this is a problem because can you see that when I am attracted to the good of God, you know how Swami Dayananda says that, that the Lord Krishna is like a perfume that attracts attention, a beautiful perfume. So when we recognize the good of God, that creates a new will towards the good, doesn't it? If you recognize something as good, you cannot help but will it. That's St. Thomas Aquinas, but it's true. And this new will is what changes us, doesn't it? Okay? So when we're looking at what we're looking at is we need to live the good that is God. In other words, it needs to become, we need to live it as a way of being in the world. Then when we're living it as a way of being in the world, that very living is knowing God. Does that make sense? When I'm being patient, I am knowing what patience is. Does that make sense? When I'm impatient and I've got an idea of patience, is that knowing what patience is? Because I've got the idea of it that I read in a book. It's not, is it? Like we can maybe understand, I like the peace of God. You can only know the peace of God when you're living peacefully, without friction. Now, we all know that the fruit of this teaching is what Swami Dayananda calls being able to rest in the lap of Ishvara, to rest in the lap of Ishvara. Now, and he says this is born out of our understanding of Ishvara. In other words, when I say understanding, not as an idea away from me. When he says understanding of Ishvara, he means knowledge of Ishvara. So when I'm resting in the very presence of God, the very life and light that is God, I change. What I find is my mind is clear and simple, and my heart is non-disturbed. But this clearness and non-disturbance isn't caused by what's happening in front of you. If you suddenly are in an argument and then suddenly you remember God, notice how it all drops away. So it's not causing the so-called problem that you were having was still the same. It's still there. But what happens is you're being changed from the inside, aren't you? Are you with me? So this is a very, very, these are your four elements. The recognition of darkness. And once we awaken to the presence of God, what happens is we can really then recognize when we're in darkness. Is that true? The wisdom of God becomes available to us in the sense that we're looking at people in the right way. Does that make sense? We're looking at life from a spiritual perspective. Yes, this is me. I'm caught up in myself again. I've fallen away from the lap. Can you see how when you're falling away from the lap of Ishvara, that is a spiritual perception, isn't it? That's bringing you home. And when you know that, when you've got the right understanding of God as this being, loving and caring being, that is constantly trying to communicate to man his reality so that we can share his life, we're being drawn in. It's constantly being drawn in. Now, when you know that there's no wrath for God, that the motivation is that if I'm moving towards God because I recognize the good of God, even though I'm caught up in myself often and stuff like that, but I still see, yes, this is the good. Can you see I'm motivated by the right reason? I'm seeking the good of God for the good itself. Does that make sense? Right? But if I'm afraid of God because I think that he hates me, was going to burn me in hell, you see the problem with that. And I feel I've got to be good in order to avoid hell. Is that the right motive? Is that the love of the heart? No. It's ridiculous. So the whole point of this is that when we awaken to the good of God, a new will is born in us, where we actually feel the movement, if you like, or the attractiveness of moving in that general direction. And how do we practice? Well, so what is our spiritual practice then, really? Our spiritual practice is this. You see, notice how, if we were to look at ourselves as what we are as an individual, we have this capacity, don't we, to be able to receive the good and the truth that is God. Is that true? That's always there. As soon as we pause, and we go like that, I'm caught again. We can become a receptivity, can't we? We can become what Swami Dayananda calls contemplative. We just simply, we want to rest in being. All right? So you have these four elements. And within every tradition, you can see these in all of them. If they are a real tradition, like what Swami Dayananda says, a real scripture applies to everybody all the time, everywhere. Okay? And you see, how many people have you ever met that think that they have the truth because they're a Hindu or because they're a Christian or because they're a Muslim? Who's ever seen that? Carry on. What the fact of the matter is the religion is an instrument to reveal the truth, which is the truth that is God. The good that is God. There's no such thing as, I've got the truth. This is the truth. This is the real deal. No. A doctrine is only as good as it can reveal the good of God, because that's the truth. And we know, and it bears fruit because our way of being in the world changes. And when we really understand that God is ever present, and by the way, we can move away from this understanding during the day and closer to it. Who's noticed that? You can move away and then you can move closer. That's just the reality. Right? You don't worry about that. That's not the point. So the thing is that when we understand that the presence of God appreciated is the transformative factor, you see, suddenly I realize that, I'm angry now. I'm no longer in the lap. Do you see how I'm now seeing the truth of it? The real meaning of my suffering is the self-dissatisfaction. It's I've fallen away. That's always the case. So all human suffering is the absence of God. So If it's the absence of God, what is the resolution? What resolves the absence of God? Because God's not absent ontologically in terms of reality, but because we lose cognition of God, God becomes absent. Are we clear here? So if we understand that, I'm in pain now, in other words, I'm suffering self-dissatisfaction, which is the absence of God in my life. I then pause and I open up my heart. And what I mean by open up my heart, Swami Dayananda said, he kept on referring, he's very impressed with, he said, I don't know what these evangelicals mean, but when they say invite Jesus into your heart, he said, but he liked the idea of inviting God into your heart. Are you with me? So the thing is that here I am, I'm in a state. That's the fact. I'm in a state of antagonism or hostility or emptiness or loneliness. It doesn't matter what it is. Opening my heart means I, as I am, open up. And I open up to the warmth and the light that is God. Because I understand God in the right way. All I know is I just have to arrive. I have to arrive at where I am. I open up and I just wait patiently. And what you find is that the warmth of God transforms your heart so it's no longer disturbed and upset and full of pain. And your mind becomes clear and aware. Of course it does, because that's what Sat and Chit are, the same reality. Just excuse me one moment. Okay, so let's discuss this. We've got 4 elements. We've got our alienation from God, which is constantly becoming evident every day. We have the reality of God, which is the transformative factor. We have the wisdom that opens up in us that makes God real to us. And then we have the spiritual task of living the life that is God as our very life. Are we all clear on that now? Okay, so turn on your mics and let's just begin to talk about this. Trisha.
Oh my goodness. Well, what can I say? It's beautifully said, that's for sure. And the first, the darkness is the darkness, and recognizing there is God. I think we all recognize that. And then the wisdom is, obtains.
Comes alive in you.
Yeah, comes alive. And then it seems that it's a long journey. To me, it seems a long journey of seeing when I'm disconnected and when I am connected, or when I say connected, it's when my heart is open and when I'm living, God is living through me and I'm just being.
Yes.
And when I'm just being, it's actually something that I think we do a lot of a good amount of the time, at least, and don't even recognize that it's happening. We're being ourselves. Something that, I don't know if y'all relate to that, but you're just putzing around and being yourself. And you may not be having great thoughts about myself or not great thoughts about myself. And going from one thing to the next, I'm in the moment with what I'm doing.
Yes.
And it's very, it's even looking for activities like going in the garden. It's a great, for me, a great way to kind of live what I'm learning, I guess, or like that. One thing that's been really useful is we've continued to study the Bhagavad Gita. And there's this one verse where Dayananda's, he's talking in the simplest terms, which is, not necessarily always the case when you're reading Bhagavad Gita from Dayananda. But he just goes into this thing where he starts talking about just make it a mantra to say, it's nice being myself. So, and it's nice being alive. And there's something about that, it's so simple, but the more that I say it to myself, it just brings me right into what you were talking about when I open my heart. When I say it, it seems to open my heart. It's nice being myself, and after saying it for a while, I recognize it means myself is beingness. So,
yes, the life and being you are, not the thoughts you have about yourself.
Right. So it's really nice, Bede, the way you have just laid it out as 4 basic elements, because it is all there really is. Those 4 elements, and then always recognizing that when I go off and I start thinking Steve here is the problem.
I'm a problem.
Completely understandable, being the sinner that he is.
Yeah, it's a more regular thing that when I see that myself doing that, I say, wait, the wisdom obtains and reminds me, this is my own self-dissatisfaction. It's just so that's over, putting it on him, and you just you see that it's just your own self-dissatisfaction underlies anything that is difficult and painful and challenging. It seems to be. There's nothing actually wrong.
No, the problem exists with you and you alone, and which is great because that gives the door to the solution. Instead of saying it's a long journey, maybe it's best to say it's a continual journey.
Yeah, continual journey.
That we have to continually choose. We have to, and this is the spiritual practice, this constant choosing to turn away. You see, we may not know what the life of God is, but we definitely know what it is to turn away from our life. And when we turn away from our life, which is what we can do inverted commas, then we're just left with ourselves as we are, and then that gives an opportunity for something else to come in. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, like, when you say, the Shin Buddhists talk about a thing called naturalness. You see, if the very life that you are is the life of God, living that life while you're doing gardening or it's normal, it's natural, it's not contrived, it's none of this spiritual romanticism or anything else, which is incredibly destructive in my view, because it makes God remote, that type of thinking. But once we understand that the very life and being we are is the life and being that is God, which is this whole non-dualistic knowledge thing, then we can relax, can't we? Do you know what I mean? We can relax. And like what did Swami Dayananda say? What did he say?
He said, it's nice being myself.
Yeah, it's nice being myself.
Yes, and nice being alive.
Yes.
Just reminding myself it's nice being alive.
Being the being I am. Being the being I am, which is given.
What I noticed too is just if I'm sort of doing my life, is these people I used to be a lot more judgmental of other people than I am now. And I've been in a work situation and there's all these personalities and every one of them is unique. And it's just fun to be with everybody else being what they are. They're all different expressions of God, even if they don't recognize that that's what they are.
That's right. Once we understand for real that what we really are is this capacity to receive the life that is God as our life, that's always there. This is also true for every other human being. Every other human being has the same problem that we do.
Yeah.
It manifests in a different way, but it's the same problem. And when you look at them like that, you have that we feeling, don't you?
Yeah.
And when if you have the we feeling, you're kind. But
yeah.
because of the compulsiveness of our vanity, which defends ourselves against the self-dissatisfaction, we take great pleasure in saying, I'm not like that person. So when we're actually criticizing, what we're really saying is, I'm pretty good. This person is bad and evil. And I don't even notice that I'm doing that. Have you noticed that you would have noticed because of the political stuff that's happening in your country, the divisiveness between the things. When you have that happening, I feel self-righteous and right in the act of condemning another. I need to condemn them in order to fortify myself against the self-dissatisfaction. Do I see that? Or do I get caught in the delusion of my own virtuous self-virtue? Which is a defense. Completely delusional. Sorry?
It's just much nicer with all these, with divisiveness and the sides and all these people that, just in general. If it's just all these characters and everybody's just playing out a role.
Yes.
I'm playing a role and we're all just playing out our roles, so it makes us all the same. That's what I've been noticing.
Same content, same content, different form. Plato's form and content? The content is the same. So when I am attacking Sylvia, that is an act of violence, right? It might not be as intense and the same magnitude as an axe murderer, but it's the same. The war that's going on in Ukraine, the killing on both sides and all of this sort of stuff, the fact of the matter is that violence, that blackened heart, that both sides feel they're right, I participate in when I'm cut off and separate from God. So the kindest thing we can do about the world is solve the world's problem as it exists in ourself. And then when we're looking at from that point of view, we lose all our kind of antagonism in righteousness. Righteousness is the most disastrous thing because what it does is enables us to look at ourselves in a very glossy way. But it's blindness. That's why that's why it's so important to be. The most spiritual thing isn't being perfect, it's being truthful. Yes, right now I'm caught in selfishness. Yes, right now I'm lying because I'm lying about myself by criticizing other people so I can feel good about myself. When I start to be truthful about myself, I'm letting the light of God operate in me, because the very fact that I see the truth about myself, that comes from God. Does that make sense? That is not from my psychological past. My psychological past and my psychological reactions will always make me right. Have you noticed that? Of course they will, because psychological self-preservation is the name of the game. But have you ever heard that saying that there's only new life when there's death? Have you heard that saying?
Yeah.
It's only through death there's new life?
Yeah.
That life of alienation has to end for the other to begin. That's why when we turn to God and open our heart, we're actually turning away from ourself. You see, when I'm caught in pain, my self-actions are I'll think about what's wrong with me. I'll start to try and use my wisdom to try and sort this out. I'm depending on who? Myself. Or what I'll do is I'll try and change other people. What am I doing? Depending on other people. So once you understand you can't depend on the world, you can't depend on yourself, and you can't depend on other people, then we have to depend on God. Does that make sense? We need to be brought to that. Have you ever heard of that saying, that blessed are those who are poor of spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God?
Mm-hmm.
The fact of the matter is, unless I realize that I have, as an isolated being, I have no wisdom that can help me. I'm not smart. I'm stupid. I'm full of error. And I've no goodness. I'm full of ill will, resentful, and petty vanity. That's a great revelation, because that will enable you to turn. It seems so counterintuitive. I mean, imagine talking to people and say, "Oh, it's a great and wonderful," because I'm not talking about a moralistic self-condemnation of myself. I'm talking about the revelation of our actual existential condition in relation to God. But it's so necessary, because we need to arrive at this place. It seems negative, but when we really see how true that is, we become humble, don't we? And we understand there's only one solution, and that is when we become infused with the goodness and the truth that is God. Always. Even if I suddenly I see I'm acting wrongly, that's the presence of God in terms of Dharma, isn't it? It's showing me, look, I'm being wrong. That goes against my psychology. Do you notice that? My psychological thing is to be right. What do you think, Bob?
Well, I've made some notes to help me. I think, speaking for myself in terms of what I've seen in my life at the moment, is becoming much easier to notice and to not take seriously the judgments that do automatically come up. And they don't really have much impact, except that you just see that there's a thought that's coming up, and you take some satisfaction in the fact that you're seeing the thought and you're not taking it really seriously. So there's that appreciation going on. I think it's a bit paradoxical, because I'm going through a time now where I'm spending a lot of attention on sort of putting a practical life together. But at the same time, I'm still pursuing all the spiritual energies are still strong. So on the one hand, when you say turn away from our life to the life of God, it's like yes and no, because I'm doing a lot of turning away I'm turning toward my life to look at what's practically needed, so to speak. But it's only a so to speak. It's like, it's not like I'm not have enough money in the bank to pay the rent, or the physical needs are not being met, but there is, there's just a sort of things are coming together to have a practical life more in line with some material acquisitions, or the ability to be not as careful with things. That's what's going on that's some of what's going on at the moment.
So when you look at your life through the eyes of intelligence, and you're looking at yourself, because you're looking through the eyes of intelligence, that's spiritual. So when you're looking at through the eyes of intelligence, you are not the thinking. See, Dyananda was very good with this, because, unlike others. He didn't believe in quieting the mind or whatever. The mind is pure when a thought or a feeling is not determining how you see or what you do. You can't worry. The presence of thoughts and feelings are not a problem. It's when we become them. And so the very fact that you say you're coming back to yourself, you're not lost in yourself. You see, the question, when I say turn away from ourselves, I mean turn away from being lost in ourselves, right? Being lost in thoughts and feelings,
Right.
whatever. The moment that we turn away from ourselves, we're brought back to first of all, straight away, there's a feeling of awareness. Have you noticed? There's just simply like you're aware. You're full of the light of awareness. So when you're rooted in awareness, you're no longer rooted in thinking, are you?
Yeah.
You see, so what happens is we're no longer rooted in ourselves, we're rooted in Ishvara. Or we're no longer rooted in ourselves, we're rooted in being, like what Tricia was talking about. And this rooted in being is not a theoretical thing. We really know it by its absence. When we're resting in being or rooted in being, the first thing is we're aware. We're being aware. We're being the awareness. The awareness may be in the form of that we're just visible, but that's fine. That's the beginning. That's real. It's because it's there I'm seeing it, as opposed to because I'm seeing it, it's there. So, and the thing is too that because we're talking about non-dualistic knowledge, it's not like I'm an empty vessel and this stuff comes through me and operates. The whole point is that God gives us his life as our life, doesn't he? So that I'm seeing with new eyes, I'm feeling with a different heart, but it's still my heart and my eyes, except it doesn't come from here. It doesn't come from time. It doesn't come from the material universe. It has a different source.
Can I say something? When you're talking about your practical aspects of your life, well, maybe this is what needs to be done right now. There is, it's bringing God into your everyday life. Well, maybe I need to sort this out. Maybe this is the intelligent thing to do.
Yeah.
So it's not one or the other. It's actually both at the same time.
That's good. That's the good of God obtaining as very practical wisdom. Because you see, the wisdom when we're not disturbed, if you notice that we can look at our life a lot clearer, and we're more available to the action of intelligence, aren't we?
Right. No,
So
yeah.
And so we need to turn our daily living in. Our daily living is our spiritual practice. And there's only one way to live the life. What we're learning fundamentally is to live the life that God is, right? This is what Swami Dayananda means by sameness. So what's the way to learn to live the life that God is giving me? The way is to live the life that God is giving me, to live the good. So that when I see that I'm being unkind, one thing I can do is I can stop being unkind. So now I am living the good, aren't I?
Right.
It's nothing to do with spiritual idealism. The only spiritual practice we have is living the good. And we live the good in terms of three actions: our conduct, our understanding, and our heart, which is that life, a new life. So it's when we so in the first instance, I turn away from the wrong and I do the right. Agreed?
Yes.
In the second instant, I see that I'm caught up in false or wrong thinking. I'm looking at you as an SOB, Bob. I turn away from that. And then my intelligence tells me, I have a thought. Bob's an SOB. It's just a thought. You know what I mean? He has the same problem as I do. So I'm now looking at you through the eyes of kindness because I recognize our kinship. The self-righteousness is gone.
Yeah.
And then lastly, the discrimination between my life, me, myself, I, and Bede, and all the stuff that goes with that, and living the life that God is constantly giving me, like what Trisha's talking about. You go out and you're doing the gardening. Your mind is clear, your heart is composed, And that clearness and composed is manifesting as gardening, in the activity of gardening, in the manner you do it. Another person might do it with a different manner. Believe me, if Sylvia got me going out doing gardening, I wouldn't be having peace. Okay.
Neither would I.
I'd have to work at that. I'd have to work at that. How are you going? What do you think, Steve?
Well, this has all been a great discussion. I don't know if I can add anything to it other than it seems to me like this point in life, I've been studying with you, say Bhagavad Gita, so many different things. I've been studying for a long time. It seems like at this point, it's basically living the wisdom, because I can't get any more knowledge as far as, what is God? I mean, I've been taught what God is just, it's everything. There's nothing that is not God. So that's kind of the understanding I try to live with. And it was interesting. You just made a point. God gives us his life as our life. And I'm trying to look at myself right now. Trish and I with Arya, we had this pretty difficult situation, a project, and nothing I wouldn't have taken this on myself at my age. But we are doing it, and sometimes it's very joyous, sometimes very frustrating. And it's just living the wisdom. Like when I see myself getting agitated, I know it's not Arya, it's not Trish, it's not anybody else that I'm working with, it's not the situation, it's triggers about me. So, and then I turn around and go, oh, well, this is a gift to understand that I have these inadequacies, self-dissatisfaction.
By the way, you don't have a plural. You only have one problem, which is the self-dissatisfaction.
Right.
Just don't. Yeah. We're not going to. You haven't got lots, Steve. You only got one problem, and your problem is my problem. Go ahead. Yep. Yeah.
So I always use the word inadequacy, and because it's kind of a deep feeling, and I know that's the same. It's synonymous with self-dissatisfaction.
Yes.
So when I see these things come, I go, oh, there it is. Everything is a gift from God, and this is too. And not that it resolves it right away, but it gives me understanding that this. I really like what you said. God gives us his life as our life. So I guess that's the kind of attitude I have been carrying through. And but I haven't really used that phrase. I really like that. This is God's life living through me. And
as you. By the way. Yeah.
And
there's no actual annihilation here.
No annihilation.
It's fulfillment. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not getting into this getting rid of the ego stuff.
No, I'm just trying to look at what life is, and I truly believe there's nothing that exists that is not God. So anything that happens to me, this is the light of God. I guess we can call it the light of God or Ishwar. And so that's just, what we've been talking about today is how I am attempting to see life, because what you say, as you see, you be. And so I'm trying to see life as everything a gift. And no matter if it's something I enjoy or do not, it's still a gift, because this is my life. You only have one moment at a time, and your one moment right now is everything that exists for me right now. So,
I'll just mention about Dayananda's thing of highlighting, right?
Yeah.
What happens is, the other night, I was about 2:00 in the morning. I wasn't sleeping properly, and I was a bit like that, right? So I did what he says. What you do is you contemplate the teaching, and you seek to see it without thinking. So in other words, you seek to be aware of this benevolent, omniactive, omnipresence reality that's constantly drawing you in. And I just found myself, as I contemplated that, just melting and relaxing into it. Does that make sense? Being willing to be carried by it. Does that make sense? It's very natural. I just become very, very relaxed, because I knew that I don't fix myself. Do you know what I mean? So I really saw it again, like I can move away from the vision, but by turning to the vision, thinking of the words of the teaching, and seeking to see the meaning right here, right now, without thinking, to actually become reacquainted with the vision, then suddenly you find yourself changing in terms of being. Does that make sense? He called it highlighting. It's a very good practice.
I've heard you talk about highlighting, and it's one of the things that's very vague to me, because to me, it's how do you contemplate what you see without thinking? So this is
okay. Well, can I just say something about that?
Yes, please.
Okay. You contemplate it by not. You just you turn your attention to the fact. You go, okay, right here, right now, as I am, I'm actually embraced by the presence of God, and I pause. Now, then I kind of wait, because I understand that all wisdom comes from God, doesn't it? I'm not going to try and make myself see this. I'm only going to contemplate the idea, the meaning. I'm going to contemplate the idea. You can even pray, please help me see this. I don't know how to see this. I have no idea how to see this. Help me. This is good. And then what happens is you'll start to see it. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. Yes.
You've done it without thinking. You've done it without reliance on your own thinking, but you've relied on the wisdom that can come alive in you as a new way of seeing. Actually,
okay.
Next time we'll actually deal with the highlighting thing, because it's a very important thing. We can deal with that next month. Actually, that's good, Stephen.
It's a hard thing to get, but I see that now when you say that, and you say helpless. And I remember reading these little books Dayananda had, the little pamphlets, and he mentions in it like these prayers, and many of them, or maybe all of them, talk about it's really a virtue to know that you're helpless, and that brings in the light of God.
Absolutely, because it turns off all of your what the Shin Buddhists call self-working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're not the doer anymore. You're allowing the light come in.
Yes, you're just simply being a receptacle for the life and light that is God, as opposed to being active, trying to fix yourself up.
Yeah.
We need to be active in the sense of turn away from wrong conduct and move to right conduct. We need to be active in terms of that we see ourselves being caught in falsity, and then we turn to the truth and start to simply pondering the truth to receive it. You see, when we ponder the truth, you will find that truth will come alive in you as your way of seeing, which I'll go into next month. It's a very interesting subject.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah.
Good. John.
Aria.
Aria.
Me.
Yeah.
So I like these 4 stages. I like when things are laid out very plainly and in a straightforward way. I liked what was mentioned really early on, something along the lines of everything you do in life before, I guess, step 1 is to like distract yourself from the truth because it's so hard to bear.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, that just stuck with me. Another thing that that came up was noticing those times when you're feeling really good and you think you've kind of got it all figured out, and then something happens and you're instantly just like feel the opposite, and you're so upset, so triggered, and you realize you really weren't that stable as you thought you were. And you're like, wow, I really thought I had it all figured out, and now I'm like in turmoil again. And so in contrast, what I've been noticing recently, my dad said we've been doing some challenging things, and it's almost like the extremity of having a certain kind of challenge outside yourself really forces you to find that inner self and inner being that is true and real, and to see that contrast where you have this stuff going on around you and you still are able to maintain composure. And it helps me to realize like how real that is, especially in contrast to the times that I think everything's good because I've kind of like fit it into my plan, but then the minute the plan goes off, I'm like so taken aback, versus when everything is in disarray and you're like, it's okay, I'll do what I need to do, like doing the right thing. And there's like a total difference in how you approach life. Yeah.
Yes, life constantly attacks our vanity. And as you say, the thing is that it's like what Trish says. It's continuous. It's strengthened us to, because what happens is it constantly, the very fact that you see that you're caught in self-disturbance, is a revelation from God, which means you can choose again. And each time you choose again, you are resolving the problem, the aria problem. You're resolving it in this moment, and you choose again. The next moment you fall away, you choose again. So, because it would be too hard to be confronted with the truth of it all at once. It's a kind process, this. It takes, and we're not trying to get a result, because we're not trying to get a future result, because that's a time process. What we're interested in doing is learning to live the life of God as our life more and more. That's it. So that's our spiritual practice. It only happens now. There's no other time, and we do it for itself. You know how they say virtue is its own reward? We do the good of God for the good, because then our motivation is right. It's not fear. It's not because I'm inadequate, I want to become bigger and better. There's none of that. It's just we live the good because it's good. That's very good, Aria. It's very, very good. You're a very lucky young lady. I wish I had known about this earlier on at your age, believe me.
Yeah.
John. We can't hear, John. Your mute's off. Your mute's on. You turn your speaker on. See that little red thing?
Little microphone.
The little microphone, the little red microphone with a cross on it. You got to click it.
Bottom left.
Oh yeah, now we got it.
Okay, we have. I'm on.
Yeah, you're on. Loud and clear, John.
Thank you. There's a great deal to be grateful for. For my entire adult life, I've had the good fortune to be influenced by wisdom and some very wise men and women. And it just seems that naturally comes with a duty, and I don't mean that as a burden, but a duty to pass that on in any way that I can. On the other side right now, I just had some surgery. I had a cataract removed, so I've been recovering for a week. But and the result of that was really quite tremendous. My vision was dramatically restored. That's most extraordinary. But at the same time, the energies right now are at low tide. I'm tired. I'm not as productive as I've been just a short while ago. And there's just a desire to be a man of substance that's of use to others and myself. And I'm not sure I'm quite living up to that expectation.
Well, one thing we can say here is that we have to be careful about this being productive business, right? Because you Americans are right into that.
Yes.
The thing is that what's important is that even if you're lying in bed but you're lying in bed, and the presence of God is you are living God's life while you're lying in bed, so that the presence of God is in the world in the form of you lying in bed. Totally acceptable. So there's never it doesn't demand that we be productive in this way or that way or this way. The fact of the matter is that the point is that when we're living God's life as our life, that can be when we're on the toilet, when we're lying in bed, when we're by ourselves, when we're helping people, for example. Because God is beneficial, of course, we express that in a beneficial way, but it doesn't demand a particular form. Otherwise, we get into idealism, and that doesn't actually help. Your situation is your situation according to laws. If it means that you stay in bed and you don't do anything, totally okay.
So what you seem to be saying is that being is enough.
Yes. And the situation you find yourself in, you have to respond to that. If it demands that you remain in rest, that's what intelligence is telling you. You are conforming with the right thing. You stay in bed and you do nothing. You don't go helping anybody. Doesn't matter. You have no idea maybe how you help the world by when God's presence becomes incarnated as our very life. Maybe that's the real help. The rest is fairly incidental. All right?
Okay. Yes.
Okay, good. Catherine.
Yeah. Well, I like the way there's like this darkness or ignorance, and then there's the reality. And because the reality is right there, and it just needs to be recognized.
Yeah.
And I was on the bus the other day, and right now, especially in New York, there's a lot of division, or ideas of division being put out. And the bus was kind of crowded, and there was traffic. And this woman sat next to me, and she had 2 little children, and she was pregnant. And we started talking, and there were 2 women sitting across, and it just flashed through my mind, oh, I don't know, something like, they probably don't want to hear our conversation, or something like that. Or they're looking at us differently. That was it. And, well, the lady that I was talking to, obviously she was very busy, and she had a bottle of water in a cloth bag, and the bottle of water with their children jumbling spilled onto the seat. And these 2 women across from us, like, they so quickly, they took out these tissues, they were handing them to us so we could clean up the water. And then I realized that they were actually enjoying listening to what we were saying. And so my idea that we were so separate was so false. And I don't know, it was just it was actually a very beautiful thing, because we all had we had a commonality, and it was just being shared. And that was the truth of it.
Yeah. The British Empire knew that the greatest way to maintain control and power is by dividing and conquering. So while people are fighting each other, kind of thing, the corporate powers to be and able to do all, it's like a bit of a magic trick, you know what I mean? They can continue there. They're quite happy with this type of thing, and it's rather sad, but it's true that basically we have in common our humanity, right? Which the propaganda, of course, wants to separate us out so that it doesn't happen. But that's the thing is that the very act that you yourself make contact with another human being is important, because that's your contribution. If you know what I mean, and if you don't buy into all of this hatred, it's a very, very good thing, and it's good to be able to just speak freely and forthrightly, and all of that stuff. That's very good, Catherine. That's good. And you see, when you see, you know, I'm a perennialist, so I follow Shivkov Schuon. He says in the time where everything's collapsing, it's very important to essentialize, like what I did today. If we essentialize, that stops all the religious divisions, doesn't it?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, you know, I know your sister's a good Catholic. I presume you are. I don't care. I just don't care. I don't think, oh, she's not Hindu. I don't care.
Yes.
Because the essentials are universal, you see. You see what I mean? God is the universal. And when you essential down to essential things, all the details are understood in the light of that essential thing. The more we learn how to think simply in this very complex spiritual supermarket, once we really grasp it essentially, we'll be able to read any tradition, actually. I do. I read all the traditions between you.
Yes.
All right.
The divisions disappear. The divisions are there.
That's only a distinction in form.
Yes.
But what counts is the content. And this is Plato's whole thing. You've got all these various different individual forms, but you penetrate through to the essence. Do you know what I mean? Which is very important, I think, more so nowadays than ever before. That's lovely, Catherine. Kevin. You're on mute. Oh, okay.
No, sorry about that. It's very interesting that to understand that my real life is the very life and being that I am, or by God. Whereas it can sound sort of sad that the idea of inviting God in my life means to turn away from myself, but that's the self that I can think about as an object and either be impressed with or disappointed with. And it's and I think I'm aware when I'm in a world of mental representations or thoughts or notions about myself, others, in the world, that it's actually complete darkness. And that's not even seen in our society.
No.
That our normal way of so-called living is a notional world full of notions of ourselves, of others in the world. And it's all of it is false, all of it is untrue.
Yeah.
And, you know, and that the wisdom is that I never see within that. I can't see. It's only when the wisdom of the light of God, the presence of God in the form of awareness shows me that I'm lost.
Yes.
Do I actually see? So it's only
that is seeing. Seeing I'm lost is actually opening the eyes. Yeah.
And it's only then if I have a bit more understanding of what the doctrine is trying to say, that God is this benevolent presence, always available to bestow blessings or helpful, truthful things in terms of conduct, in terms of understanding, in terms of living my real life, which is living in being, not as an idea, not as a thought. It's only available when I and again, it's something that obtains in me. It's a spiritual understanding. I can't think about how to do that.
No.
As natural man or as personality.
No.
But it's something that I understand becomes available once I see that I'm lost, that I can wait. And because God is this benevolent presence, always present, that his presence can obtain in me as my very life, my being. Whereas, and then I can be aware of thoughts without being thoughts or being lost in
exactly
thoughts. So then there's no problem with thoughts at all.
No. You see that ultimately what we're looking at is this. We're caught in this egoic dark life, the only thing that solves the problem is a new life opening up in us. This new life opens in us, first of all, through cognition, through wisdom. And then the more we live this life, the more it gets established in us. And so the thing is that what I wanted to do today was just kind of...
Yeah, I like to say.
Yep, go.
Yeah. So I think the analogy that John brought up with the cataract operation, and then seeing so much clearer after the operation, is kind of like life. You know, it's only through the wisdom of God, which is the
surgery.
I see the same thing in a total different way, a lot clearer. And the thing is that we have to have an operation every second of our life.
Yeah. Particularly you, darling, I'm finding.
But that's it. That's a pretty good analogy. And another thing too that came up for me was, you know, live we must. From the moment we are born to the minute we die, live we must. But can we live our life more intelligently?
Yeah. And it's, you see that.
Yes, Kevin.
So
Kevin wants to say. You're on mute, Kevin. Yep.
I found it very helpful when you said to someone, this isn't a long struggle, a long path. It's about choosing to, through the grace of God, choose when we see that we're in a falsity, to choose. It's a constant choosing. It's
turning,
not,
that's
the
right.
Idea I need to do it for a long time, or I don't do it for long. That's egoic thoughts about self-condemnation about myself. But it's just the nature of the situation that we are constantly given the opportunity to choose, and to choose the life that is God. And we only discover the benefit of that by living it. So, and anything else is just, as you might say, fluff.
Yeah, and when we're actually choosing to live it when we are living it. It's not like I choose and then when I'm living it, I'm choosing it. It's like when I'm living in darkness in one sense, I'm choosing it because I'm very much concerned with love of myself and love of the world. I'm caught up. There's not much dispassion. And that's why this whole purpose of karma yoga is the more we resolve the pain, the self-dissatisfaction, we resolve the force of the binding desires, because the binding desires are our method to resolve the self-dissatisfaction. So the whole point is the heart. Yes, Trish?
No, that's very significant point there. That's all. I was just, yes, that's the whole thing. It's getting free from the binding desires.
Yes. And we do that by, here we are, I'm suddenly in an argument with you, you're my spouse, and then suddenly I'm caught up with the self-dissatisfaction. I turn to God, open that up, my mind clears, my heart becomes soft and kind. I've resolved that self-dissatisfaction now, and then I'm now freed from that demand that Sylvia should be different or whatever.
Yeah.
So this is the magic of Dayananda's sameness. Well, it's been a lovely time to spend with you guys today, as usual, for both Sylvia and me. And we'll see each other in a month.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
And in the meantime, in the meantime, just concentrate on those four elements: the perception of darkness, the opening up of wisdom, ponder what the nature of God is when you got time. Do you know what I mean? And living a new life, living the new life that He gives us. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.